Hey, Print Hustlers, welcome back to another episode of the Printavo Print Hustlers podcast. I'm your host, Bruce from Printavo. We've got our co-host, Mr. Stephen Farragut of Campus Inc., and very special guest. I need to get a soundboard. I feel like I need an audience that cheers every time I do this. But our very special guest, Rafael Perez, out of Portland, Oregon. Now,
hey guys, thanks for having me. How are you?
Pretty good.
Thank you for being able to join us. I know you've got a crazy schedule, so it's an honor to be able to hang out and spend an hour with you.
Yeah, well, typical day in the garment industry, right?
That is so true, actually. You know, before I actually ask you that, it's funny because earlier today I was over at Supercolors, one of their warehouses here, and just seeing how everything works and chatting with Walia, who's over there, and they've got a really cool, just crazy growing operation. And I'm walking back to the car, and I just see a banner that says screen printing and embroidery. And I'm like, And I walk in and ended up meeting the owner. Super nice guys. They're over at Mixer Inc. And I was like, what's that laptop? And then they're using Printavo on there. And I was like, damn, that's really cool. And he's like, yeah,
nice.
Dude, there's like 4 or 5 shops just on this street.
Did they know who you were, Bruce?
Yeah, he watches a lot of the videos. So that helped because I sent him a message real quick on Instagram like, hey, can I stop by? I'm going to be in the area back again in like an hour. And I just said Bruce at the bottom. So that helps. He's like, dude, I love watching the tours. I get ideas. And he's showing me he's building out this space, like this office area, you know, and sectioning it off. But he's been grinding, got hit hard by COVID. And then now it's just really ramped back up again. So
cool.
Anyway, I digress.
Very cool.
So, Raf, tell us a little bit about yourself. How'd you get into the industry?
Yeah, so as I was explaining a little bit last week to Bruce, was that I have a background in liberal arts. And so during school, I actually, also kind of branched off into like watercolor paintings and cross-hatching. And that kind of took me into the realm of graphics and graphic design. So I actually took up color separation very early on as I was also working on graphics. Not satisfied with just, the virtual aspect of the process. I always loved the screen process, obviously the color process. I was actually being trained in a very interesting part of the process for me, and being paid for it. So I always had fun. It almost seemed like a hobby to me. Production can be a little bit monotonous, but I spent a few years in production, just kind of like witnessing if you establish the right fundamentals in pre-press, in artwork, right, is where the big payoff is at.
Very interesting that you bring that up. With Stephen, you doing a little bit of a time study around pre-production and setup compared to actual print time.
Yeah, we Bruce and I were screen sharing last week, and I was showing him we kind of have timers set up for different stages of the job. And we were looking at it, and the majority of the day was all in pre-press and setup and teardown. And
Sure.
I kind of said, yeah, someone told me once we're screen makers, not screen printers. We're really good at setting up, but the printing part, doesn't take the longest. And it was kind of eye-opening because I'm like, wow, how many hours a week do we spend in pre-press? And it just,
Correct.
I started counting, and I'm like, oh boy.
Sure, and how critical it is for a successful production run. At times some folks may focus more on production, but establishing root causes and understanding the fundamentals of pre-press and how it affects in a good or a bad way the production process. I think that's really where it's very key, and kind of maybe the difference between a very successful business and one that may have a lot of opportunities if you're not already establishing those best processes in pre-press. So I'm a big proponent of pre-press because it's obvious to people such as yourself that that's really where the success begins. kind of like behind the curtain, behind the scenes. And then, we're screen printers, and some of us are screen makers and ink mixers, but at the end of the day, your customer pays for a well printed, garment or substrate, right? So it's kind of my thought on the process. I also think, I love artwork. Obviously, it's my background. Design is my background, but I never lose track. I always continue to focus on this being a business. It's a fun business if you want to make it a fun business, but at the end of the day, we're hoping to get larger runs, right? Larger volume. And although I love, Taj Mahal type of artwork, at the end of the day, everybody has to, make a living and turn a profit, and hopefully, help out wherever we can, community-wise, and, workers, and, establish a really good, clean business. But at the end of the day, one good piece or one beautiful piece is not what we're after. We're after, large production, hopefully, and, being able to support all of our customers in the highest volume that we can, right?
Raf, you're at a pretty large international retailer. What is your role with working with decorators and just day-to-day look like?
Again, super fun kind of responsibility for me. I get to push, manufacturers, global manufacturers on their process, on how to identify, gaps and opportunities. What is the next best thing in terms of, best practices, process controls, equipment, supply. So I'm there to challenge them into that new era that doesn't come around very often. The longer we're in the business, the less there are opportunities. Be it a decade or more back, with DTS, there's been automated dispensing for ink, and so I'm always constantly pushing them and challenging them on that. And then, dealing with the daily, troubleshooting of screen printing, because we gotta admit it, right? It's challenging to be a screen printer. It's fun, but it comes always with that troubleshooting aspect of it. As much as we would like it to be an automated function and for it to work more like a digital type of application, that's not what you get, in a very kind of artisan type of practice, such as, normal analog screen printing.
On the really specific side, like, is it also helping the QA? Are you finding more decorators for the brand? Like, some of those really big details, because we met when we were in Portugal, right? And you're doing a lot of research of different brands and things that's happening and different technology in the space. What does that day-to-day look like for you?
So I'm constantly scanning for new things. For example, I'm very interested in this new laser equipment for computer to screen. So that's something that I will be in contact with the manufacturer about. I try to get myself very, very involved initially in whatever that new process or equipment may be. I can either set up some workshops around the potential equipment or process. I really do start to make some action plans around doing an R&D, doing testing, building an ROI for whatever the project is, helping just kind of close that gap in between a beta type of product versus actually installing it in production and then reaping the rewards of it. Gotcha.
So Raf, what would you say is like the biggest innovation recently? You talked about laser, right? But in the last, if you were to look at the last 10 years, what would you say has been the biggest change that you've seen on your side of it?
I would say, it kind of depends on the hemisphere, because, there's some things being done, for example, in Asia or other parts of the world that have not reached or have not become mainstream, in application in other regions. So I'd say probably the biggest and most significant in the last decade or so, at least for the American continent, has been water-based PVC-free inks in general. I mean, the way that they, the amount of opacity and the coverage of a water-based ink was kind of unheard of, maybe 10, 12 years back, in the larger cities of the U.S. and in Latin America, of course. So that, I think we've been very, very dependent, as a continent on like plastisol or, products, acrylic-based products and plastic-based products such as that. But I think what's really pushed the industry, at least here in the continent, has been, the way that water-based has really paid off and the way that it continues to be, installed in larger shops. And, just showing how, 10, 12 years ago, that just was not possible. And now it's really kind of changed manufacturers' minds.
Wow. So you talked about hemisphere, right? And you said, there's things that have not hit, this continent yet. Has water-based, are we behind? Meaning, like, if you were to go to the Asian countries, like you talked about, have they been using water-based a lot longer than we have? Or are we leading that, or, that charge?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think cost-wise, Asia has obviously, they have their raw materials very close. So in terms of like supply chain and cost, that they're basically living in ground zero, right? That's where a lot of the raw materials come from. It's obviously prior to shipping or freight, the cost is very attractive to them. So I believe that if for different reasons that the water-based product has been used in other hemispheres such as Asia much earlier than in the Americas. The Americas, I feel like, has been very tea printing centric. So, all of that stuff is synonymous with plastisol, the advent of even like, pseudo plastisols, kind of to support that tea printing business, be it amusement parks or souvenir shops and things like that we have all over the country. And that's what's kind of driven, I feel like it's driven Latin America into using, or in the past has driven them to use more plastisol to mimic kind of the American printer. But, those times are changing, and, I often see, shops either using, some parts of a water-based system or all together using a water-based system. I think people are starting to realize the efficiencies and kind of a different mindset about using PVC-free water-based ink systems.
So just to follow up on that, just because I think this is a very hot topic of water-based, and I don't think our intention today was to talk about water-based ink, but we're here, and I think it's really cool because you've seen it kind of evolved. People will always say, Discharge, that cannot be friendly to like our ecosystem. Like Discharge, I mean, that stuff is awful, right? What's your take on that? Because, I mean, printing with Discharge is a very important part of water-based printing, I think, from what I know. How does that fit into the narrative of being plastisol free?
Well, there are products out there, zinc containing products in discharge printing that, should be called out as a restricted substance. I don't care or it doesn't matter to me who the brand is. I mean, do it as a movement, and making sure that, we're not affecting the environment. So that to me is like rule number one about discharge. So there are some products out there that should be restricted, but there are also some really, really good options now in terms of like dry state, non-formaldehyde products can either not have formaldehyde in them altogether, or they can, you can evaporate it in minutes in a dryer and post cure. So there are options for people that, truly care and want to do what's right for the safety of their workers and for the environment.
I think that's interesting because we're starting to see a migration of it. We talk about night owl printing in Texas that has made it a statement to say we will do the most technical of printing and the highest of quality, and we will only use water-based. So it's really great to see that. Talk to us about some of the other innovations that you've seen. What's something that you saw maybe like 5 years ago or 10 years ago that's now starting to hit the States?
Because you mentioned Asia has some interesting stuff that I haven't swooped
Yeah.
over too.
I would say digital is obviously something that's, kind of before our eyes, taking place and getting bigger and better all the time. And I can't believe I'm saying that because I'm a screen printer at heart, and, that's my roots. But, digital has shown to be more and more feasible all the time. I mean, I think it's, the days of, printing 50 pieces an hour, one color or two colors. They've gotten way ahead of that. I think that digital is probably the largest milestone for apparel printing or apparel embellishment. It's still a higher ticket price on some of the equipment and some of the consumables around digital, but I mean it continues to move forward. I mean I think that as you amortize the cost of digital equipment inside of 3 or 5 years, they've become much more faster, better quality, and just seems to be overall better in terms of efficiency. But I think their time is now.
This is interesting. My business partner is twice my age. He shows me like pieces of ruby lith and wax and all that, and he said, I bought a camera enlarger and then the computer came out.
Yes.
When do you think digital will be the standard when you walk into a print shop? Do you think that day's coming sooner than we think, or do you think it's still 10 to 15?
Or is it a balance too? Because there's some thoughts of like it's like it is now, where it's certain jobs are ran digital, different types versus others, or does it really sweep across?
I'm going to say, the way that I look at digital, it's kind of a complement to textile embellishment, right? I don't look at it as like, it's analog or digital. I think they both have their place. I think where digital is at today is that it's carving its own niche. It will be very clear where it's feasible and where it isn't. Obviously the number of colors, complexity, resolution of artwork, those are things that digital excels at. But, that's not to say that analog or good old screen print will be replaced. I mean, screen print is still by far much faster than any other medium, any other high volume medium. The quality of screen print, the authenticity of screen print also can't really be challenged. I mean, I think there's been a lot said about digital and its quality, but I'm kind of a music fan too, so I always look at it in this way. You can digitize an audio file, you can polish it, you can compress it and make it more portable. But at the end of the day, what's really showing is that analog or vinyl or high resolution audio continues to have that extra oomph that screen printing is basically a very artisan skill, and I think it kind of shows that in the quality and the authenticity of the actual materials that are used to render the artwork.
Yeah, I was just we were doing a workshop with Aaron Draplin, and he was talking all about like how he's very much a traditionalist with his stickers and posters, and he's like, you have to respect the craft, and pay more for that stuff and things like that. Super interesting.
Right.
Talk to us a little bit about like apparel manufacturing itself. Like cut and sew is this big thing we hear now, right? Do you see that coming stateside anytime soon, or do you think that's going to stay international for as long, as you can imagine?
Well, as I sit here in Los Angeles, California, I'm from here. I grew up in, very garment industry circles here, in the heart of downtown, very, very small compared to where it was in the 90s. I mean, I was hoping, that the current, social issues could maybe point towards bringing that back. I mean, there's nearshore. There's also nearshore here in Southern California with Mexico. So I think it's kind of previously gone. The business has gone as far as Asia, right? Or the Middle East. And then it seems to be inching back in certain ways. You have South America, Central America, and then you have nearshore here in northern Mexico. It does point towards some level of manufacturing, cut and sew, embellishment, coming back. I just don't think that the right decision makers in government have supported that too much. And the reality is the cost, workers' comp, insurance, those are still very impactful to folks, as business owners. So I think that's a real big challenge for the industry, and being able to bring jobs and manufacturing back to the States. I do also understand that many brands are now interested in providing, presentation studios, showing customers, how they do their R&D, how they make samples. There's a glimmer of hope there, and I think maybe we've all kind of learned a lesson on how to not keep your manufacturing too far away, especially with things such as COVID or even previous supply chain issues that the industry has seen. So yeah.
What did the supply chain issues you talk about that look like at such a large scale, retail perspective?
Yeah, well, I mean, not just where I'm at, but just colleagues that I have across the industry that work for other very large, important brands. And what we've seen is even in like ink manufacturing or supplies, just consumables for manufacturers, is that there's a real shortage of containers is a real threat. That's something that maybe, people don't drill down to where what the delays are. I hear about delays all the time, but there's literally a shortage of containers, and these containers have become kind of a hot commodity to shippers, from different parts of the world, where it's almost like a bidding war for containers to be shipped. Performance and on-time delivery is really what's impacting a lot of major retailers.
I didn't even think of that as, and you think of what's happening in the Suez Canal right now, and like, wow, you don't realize the supply chain backup until something like that happens, and then you think about the ripple effect of the pandemic, and
Yes.
in the Suez Canal, it was stopped for what, like a week,
Yes.
and pandemic shut us down for still right now.
Yeah.
You don't think about that stuff, and you don't think about how valuable that and precious that is to those manufacturers and retailers.
Yeah, I stay up to date with major ink suppliers, both U.S. based or European or even Asian, and it's the same story with all of them. Is that the shortage of containers is really impacting? That's really where it starts. That's where their current woes begin. Is just securing a container. Things that we used to take for granted before COVID. You wouldn't even consider that as an issue.
I'm kind of pivoting back a little bit, but how does large retail view digital as well? Like, is it like today's perspective? Is it a sampling thing? Is it more personalization? I see in stores and everything, there's some really cool personalization being done. Is it just more of watching it and sort of saying, okay, maybe in 5 years we have a huge, capital investment here to help pivot? Or
Well, from a manufacturing standpoint, I think printers, embellishers probably should have a better idea of what are the capabilities, and then do a good job of selling those capabilities and those attributes to the major brands. I think the major brands kind of rely on the manufacturers of the equipment and on the users, such as the manufacturers, to kind of educate the brands of what those attributes are, and just building a really good case, being very transparent of what the costs are, what the implications are, because digital is not the first choice for some segments of the business. You could say that in the same breath. I mean, if you're going to do larger business, larger volume, maybe digital is not for you. But if you're going to do, Bruce, like you say, a lot of custom, one-off prints and, quick turn type of business, then digital is definitely something that you should at least look at. I think right now with the speed at which it's, moving along and progressing, I think a lot of people just need to fully understand why pick digital? Why would you go digital today? Would you go digital just because it's not screen print? Would you go digital because it's a premium for your artwork or the resolution of your artwork? Or is it just that it's a cost cutting measure for your business? So there's a few different ways to look at digital. If you're looking to just, elevate the resolution of your artwork, the LPI of your artwork, this is a sure shot way of doing it. But, you're going to be paying a premium for it. And if you have that kind of margin, great. If you don't, then you don't want to find out after you've bought a $500,000 machine that, maybe the opportunity for your business is not there. So I think it's just education and looking at the application in every light or in every facet of your business.
Has digital affected like inventory, right? Like being able to print on demand, or we talked about setup time earlier, but as we're also thinking like speed to customers, speed to end user, there's less brick and mortar now. Has digital affected how, bigger companies look at inventory positions or anything like that?
I think it's helped, in addition to other, measures that retail has taken, things such as smaller orders, which I'm not, a huge proponent of, per se. I don't think you really set up your vendor, by, cutting back on, the volume or the size of your orders. I don't think that's the solve for running lower inventory. I think just being better about your forecasts, I think single-handedly is a much better way about going about that. But I think digital does help, or is one of those tools to help drive the inventories lower, such as being able to print one-off artwork, so you can do hot folder style single one-off pieces, like printing on every palette a different graphic, or on every garment. Things like that help. Obviously, complexity of artwork is something that digital is really good at, and number of colors. For us, for screen printers, every color, we're used to counting every color as a screen or two. So digital definitely helps, and it's a big tool for driving lower inventories. But that's kind of the name of the game, and I think it's going to continue. Stores are now realizing that the bottom can fall out very easily, and the lower liability that you have, which is inventory on the books, the easier or the less risk there can be, right?
Now take that to the consumer, right? Our buying habits have changed as a world that's mostly buying electronically and digitally and getting things shipped. How has that changed the landscape of manufacturing to prepare for that? Fulfillment is this new thing that we're challenged with every day now. Right. Is this something that we're seeing a ripple effect in, that everyone's challenged with, to have to be the 2-day shipper of the world?
I think that just the mindset of the more modern consumer does expect things faster. They expect shipping to be faster. They expect a certain level of customizable product if possible. I mean, I would say maybe 20 years ago in the industry, it was rare to walk into a store, say in, I don't know, Salt Lake City, and find something that was branded with the city. Now you see it across the country. You see customized product all the time. So I think that will continue. Obviously, sportswear and activewear. I think that a lot of that is some of the things that make those items extra special for the consumer is having that customizable piece or option to it. So I think also, app-based shopping and, just digital sales in general also supports a lot of that, that speed that the consumer expects nowadays.
That's interesting to think about. I mean, there's so many factors here. Like, Steven, you doing that study of like we're only printing call it half the day and the rest is set up tear down, really pushes on the theoretical vision of digital. But from a retail perspective, I mean, I was reading a great article or a couple days ago just on brands just will build up to a point where they have to get into retail, like physical stores, and so you talk about, okay, maybe the companies don't have as many physical stores there, but at some point, if they want to reach more people, they need people to feel and touch it. So it's not that it's gone, but it seems a bit different. And then the flip side was that they're using stores to also ship to customers too more locally. So it is that faster delivery instead of from a central warehouse,
Sure.
which maybe does play into a lot of those digital aspects when you talk about quality, being able to get there because it is a little bit more on demand. Now, the flip side, I guess, is though then the shop is a lot more holding on to the inventory unless, brands do bring it in house. So yeah, I don't know. It's so interesting thinking like how each pulls and pushes each side and
Yes.
where that affects the other end.
And then there's the whole psychology of the amount of product. It seems to me like the current consumer is probably more interested in a product that is not very plentiful as well. I've seen where there's very small amounts of product in a store and the margin is very high, and I believe there's sort of like an exclusivity
Yeah, like
to
a scarcity
aura to it.
cycle.
Yeah. And that's kind of the appeal to the consumer as well. So that's something to think about. And I think that's a little bit more on the like kind of resale market and like pop-up shops and things like that as well.
That's interesting. Everybody, this is Rafael Perez joining us live out of, Portland or LA. You're back and forth a bunch, but
Yes.
thanks so much
West
for being
Coast.
able to share just the background. I mean, we absolutely have to be able to do this again, especially in person when you're around next, because there's just so much depth in a lot of this, especially at the scale you're at. Thank you guys for joining us, though, again for another episode of Printavo Printmasters Podcast. I'm your host, Bruce, for Printavo. We'll see you again next week.